What's up, guys? So today I'd like to talk about buyer agency compensation. Like I'm sure many people have heard in the news about some changes happening with realtor commissions for buyers agents. And a lot of sellers have been asking me, Yosef, do I even have to offer a commission anymore? And if so, how much? So with these new rules, offering the buyer agent a commission is no longer required, but not doing so could present some challenges depending on the type of market we're in. So that's what this video is about, and I'm basically going to lay out two options for you to consider. The first is the traditional way of selling, where the listing agent would sign a contract with the seller for a total commission of, let's say, 5 to 6%, which is typical in this market. And part of that is then used as the marketing tool to incentivize the buyer agent in order for them to bring that buyer. Then that leads us to the second way you can sell your home, which is my new strategy, where we basically offer a lot more value to the buyers directly and basically kind of bypass the buyer's agents and force a bidding war to get the most money possible without you having to pay thousands of dollars to those buyer's agents. Both ways have their pros and cons, so we'll talk about all of that and more in this video. I'm excited about it, so let's get started. So before we talk about that, regarding what the new strategy is, it's important to discuss what are the three ways in which a seller can incentivize or attract buyers. Because at the end of the day, these three incentives, they've always existed and will continue to exist. But how and when you use them is really where the strategy comes into play. And I like to think of these three incentives as carrots that we can use to attract the buyer. So the first one is the most obvious, which is to offer a competitive price. Because let's face it, if your home is let's say it's worth $1 million and you put it on the market for $2 million, is it going to sell? No. So offering a competitive price is the first obvious carrot that a seller can offer in order to attract the most buyers. The second one is buyer concessions. And this is used a lot, especially in new construction when they don't want to drop the price. So for example, let's say a home's been sitting on the market for a little while and maybe the builder just wants to offer something like a free kitchen upgrade. But for your typical home seller, the way that looks is, let's just say that, like a buyer comes in and he loves everything about the house, but they're not crazy about the flooring and would also like to get it painted. But after putting down 20%, they really don't have much of a budget left to renovate after the sale. So instead of submitting an offer with a lower price and no concessions, they instead submit an offer for $10,000 more, but with a $10,000 concession in the form of a credit to get that done after closing. So they're essentially paying the same and you still get the same net price, but on the buyer's end, the closing costs are much less and ultimately you get what you want, which is for the house to be sold. So by offering a buyer concession, this is basically the second carrot a seller can do in order to get the property, sold. Then the last incentive a seller can offer isn't actually for the buyer, but rather for the buyer's agent, which is to offer them a commission to bring in the buyer. And there are a lot of things a good buyer's agent still does for their clients. And I imagine moving forward, hiring one will become even more important than ever. But I'll be honest with you, finding a home these days is typically done more by the buyer themselves rather than the agent. Unless they're trying to find the buyer an off-market property, the majority of the searching is going to be done by the buyer. And before the internet, buyers didn't really have access to any of that data, so sellers really needed to offer a generous commission to the buyer's agent to get it sold. Moving forward, however, there's obviously certain situations where offering a buyer agent commission still makes sense, and other times when it may not make sense to offer the full 2.5% or 3% that was typical before. And a lot of that, in my opinion, will depend on the type of market we're in and the price point of the property. So the amount you offer the buyer's agent is the last incentive or carrot that you can have at your disposal, and we'll discuss that a little bit more. So moving forward, these three things haven't really changed, and you can still offer your home for a very competitive price with buyer concessions and even a very generous buyer's agent commission. However, now in the new system, sellers will have more flexibility on who they wish to incentivize more, the buyer or the buyer's agent. Now I'm sure you're thinking to yourself, awesome, I don't have to pay anything to the buyer's agent anymore. And while that's technically true, I want you to consider this. So while the new rules seem like they're great for sellers, it's going to add extra challenges for buyers. Because now the buyer is responsible to pay for their agent if the seller isn't offering anything. And this may not be a big deal for luxury buyers because, let's face it, they've always had the resources to hire a top buyer's agent, just like they would, hire the best lawyer to represent them and negotiate on their behalf. But it's definitely going to put some buyers in a tough situation. For example, let's consider first-time home buyers. So as a seller, why should you, be concerned with this new added cost to buyers? Well, even if it doesn't affect you directly, it's going to affect you indirectly. And to paint a picture with how that plays out, I want you to take off your seller's hat for the time being and put your buyer's hat on, and imagine for a moment that you're a first-time home buyer all over again, and it's now basically your responsibility to make up the difference with what your agent charges and what the seller is providing. And let's say that you've worked really hard to save up 20% to put down on your new dream home, and there are 10 homes currently for sale that fit your criteria. And 8 of them are offering some sort of concession to either the buyer or the buyer's agent. However, 2 of them were simply offering nothing. Now, honestly speaking, if you were the buyer, which of those 10 homes would you even look at? Yeah, you'd probably be giving a lot more consideration to those 8 homes that are offering something to the buyer or buyer's agent. And you may not even consider the other 2 unless they were offering considerable value. So, let's face it, for a first-time home buyer with a limited budget, never having purchased a home before, and being very nervous about the whole process, going unrepresented really isn't an option. Now, let's put your seller's hat back on, and I want you to also consider this. Under the new system, buyers can't even look at a property unless they have a signed agreement with a buyer's agent. So moving forward, the most serious buyers are much more likely to be contractually obligated to pay a buyer agent they're already working with. So there's going to be a lot less uncommitted buyers out there. And the best ones, meaning the ones that have cash in the bank and they're pre-approved and ready to go, they're going to be working with a buyer's agent much more moving forward versus, casual buyers just walking in out of curiosity. So if you're the seller and, you're just wanting to offer nothing, you may be excluding a large group of the most serious buyers who are ready to buy today. So that's something you want to consider. So going back to the carrot analogy, where you choose to offer value to draw in the most buyers is totally up to you. So in order to consider the best strategy moving forward, let's look back to some different markets in the past. All right, so let's reflect about how the market was in 2021. So right after the pandemic started, people obviously, they wanted to work at home more, they were leaving the big cities, and basically quality of life became top of mind, especially during the lockdowns, and everybody wanted to move. So interest rates were at 2 to 3%, and as a result, the real estate market was really on fire. So how did sellers position their homes back then? Well, I want you to just kind of look at this little schematic I made. So basically, you had sellers offering their homes for right around market value, which still generated multiple offers. They were offering little to no incentives to buyers unless the home needed repairs, and they offered a large buyer's agent commission because they felt obligated to, since all the other sellers were pretty much doing the same thing and everything was selling. So that obviously frustrated the sellers because they felt like they were paying too much to the buyer's agent, and ultimately that's what led to the lawsuits and to the changes that are now in place. Now in 2010, of course, the market was very different. It was after the housing market crash where prices were just dropping for years. So in 2010, you could barely give away your home, let alone sell it, because everyone just felt that prices would just keep dropping. And, with much stricter lending standards now in place, buyers were hard to come by. And in order to get a home sold back then, sellers had to offer a strategy more like this. So they'd offer the home for a very competitive price. You can see a big fat juicy carrot there. So they'd offer the home for a very competitive price, lots of buyer concessions to help with closing costs, and they would pay a buyer's agent anything, 3, 4, 5%, or whatever it took to get the home sold. So basically, if you wanted to sell your home back then, you had to fully utilize every single incentive possible. So what's the new strategy moving forward? Well, you definitely have to consider the type of market we're in, but assuming we're in a balanced market, here's the big question you'll want to ask yourself. Are you looking to sell in a more traditional way where you list the home right around fair market value, or maybe try to list it a little bit higher? And as a result, you're going to need to pay more in commissions or concessions to get it sold. Is that an option? Or are you more open to a new way of selling with less commission, where you sell your home more like an auction that forces buyers to compete and drives multiple bids, and ultimately gets you the highest net price in your pocket. Because let's be honest here, if you think it's possible to list your home for a really high price, like way over market value, and you're not going to offer anything to the buyer in terms of concessions, and you're not even going to pay a buyer's agent anything to incentivize them to bring a buyer, well, that would just be a waste of your time, because there is no market, no matter how much it favors sellers, where that house is going to sell. So in other words, you have to offer something of value in some meaningful way. And it goes without saying, offering the home to a buyer for a competitive price is always going to be important, no matter what type of market we're in. So let's get back to the example about the property we were discussing before that was valued at $1,239,000. And we'll break down the numbers and see how that works. So moving forward, depending if you want to start out by pricing your home high, low, or right around market value like we discussed in the pricing section, you basically have these two new ways that I would recommend selling your home. So let's go back and examine the example of the property that was priced at $1,239,000, and let's see how that works out. So basically, we have the home is $1,239,000. Same thing as the market right now is at 32 days average time to sell. So you basically have two ways of selling. You have the traditional way, which is how it's always been done, where we list it at right around market value or sometimes slightly higher, and you end up paying both the listing agent and the buyer's agent. So the strategy here is we want to incentivize all the buyer's agents by offering a commission, so they bring their buyers while also listing the home for a price more in line how typically sellers sold their home, which is right around fair market value. And what are the expected closing costs? Well, again, this is more in line with how homes have always been sold, with commissions right around 5 to 6%, and possibly some buyer concessions around 1 to 2%. Especially, if we really only have one buyer to work with, we're kind of at their mercy, and they may ask for, any kind of concessions that they want. So you can see here if we list it for a competitive price of $1,250,000, which is right around market value or slightly higher based on the price bracket we discussed, we could 1 to 2% would be the typical buyer concession, and the typical buyer's agent would be commission would be 2.5 to 3%. So assuming it does sell for $1,250,000, and we are paying 1.5% buyer concession, 2.5% to the buyer agent. So all the closing costs, including taxes, escrow, commissions, etc., would be $96,792, and the net result would be $1,153,000 and change net to you in this example. And the property should sell for right around 32 to 48 days. And why would you want to, pick this option? Well, if you feel more comfortable selling the traditional way, where you list your home for right around fair market value or more, and just make adjustments as needed, this is the way to go, basically. And the second option is basically what I'm going to call a negotiated sale, basically like the auction method, where we list the home below market value, and you're only obligated to pay the listing agent in this situation. The strategy here is, instead of focusing on the buyer's agent, we instead focus all our attention on offering the most value to the buyer directly with a lower starting bid price, rather than giving away so much to the buyer's agent or through concessions. The result ends up being multiple bids, better terms, and lower closing costs. So what are the expected closing costs, you might ask? So if you list your home for a price that forces multiple bids, then most likely you're going to save yourself 2% or more in closing costs versus the traditional way of selling. So let's say we list the property for $1.1 million. You're going to start a crazy bidding war. We're going to negotiate the concessions and the buyer's agent commission. And most likely when you have like 20, 30, 40 offers, everyone's going to be fighting to get this house. They're going to be dropping appraisal contingencies, maybe reducing inspection contingencies. They're going to give away as much as they possibly can, and they're going to be looking basically where they can trim the fat. So there's a lot of buyers that maybe don't even really need 2.5% to their buyer's agent. Obviously some will be contractually obligated to pay that and some won't. Like maybe they're being represented by their brother or their cousin or whatever, and they're going to get the family discount, and maybe they're only going to charge them 1%. So at the end of the day, by having everyone compete multiple rounds of bidding, That's ultimately going to push the price up as high as possible and get you the best terms and the lowest closing costs. So let's say we list it for 1.1 and we get a bidding war going and it sells really just for $1,250,000. It should sell for more, but let's just assume for now that it sells for the same price as the traditional sale. So we get it at $1,250,000 as well here. So let's assume that we get it down to 0% buyer concessions and 1% to the buyer's agent. That will bring the closing costs to you to $59,292, so you'll net $1,190,000 and change. So basically, that's a difference of $37,500. It's no chump change. It's a pretty significant amount, and the advantage, of course, is I guarantee your home will be sold in 28 days. Most likely, we'll have it under contract in 7 to 14 days, and that's pretty much it. So I would still recommend, if you have a luxury property, I would probably recommend you still go with the traditional way of selling, especially if your home's like, $5 million, $7, $8, $10 million. This being the newer method, this is obviously already proven with homes that are like $2 million or less, because how we used to sell them before when there was bidding wars. But now you have extra incentive to use this method because you can save even more by not having to pay so much in buyer's agent commission. So those are your two options. Hope that makes sense. All right, so just to wrap up this video, I'm going to tell you a little secret, which is my proven strategy when it comes to getting top dollar on a house. Basically, a lower price is going to cause a higher perceived value on your home. A higher perceived value is going to cause more exposure. More exposure ends up causing more showings. More showings causes more offers. Multiple offers will then cause a bidding war. Bidding wars cause people to bid based on emotion, not logic. And ultimately, in the end, getting buyers to bid on emotion causes you to get the highest top dollar sales price. Now, ultimately, whatever pricing strategy you feel is most comfortable to you, I'm simply here to serve you in order to accomplish whatever is most important for you in a time period that works best for you and your family. So give me a call. I'll do a detailed analysis of your home. We'll figure out what your home is worth as a team. We'll see how those different pricing strategies could play out, and then I'll simply leave it up to you to decide how best to proceed. So if that sounds good to you and you're watching this, check out my links below. You can contact me or jump on my calendar to discuss your home more in depth. And if you found this video useful, please be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon.